3 years after 9/11, and Ground Zero has become a sacred shrine to the memories of the 2,740 people who were killed there. Each week, 100,000 people walk along these barriers and look to the skies for answers. Why? How? Could it happen again? And most everyone believes it profoundly changed America. In a nation where faith in God and country are indivisible, in the face of the tragedy of 9/11, for a time it was branded un-American to dissent.
After 9/11, you were considered to be either with the United States in its so-called war on terrorism, or you were considered to be with the terrorists.
In the aftermath of 9/11, throughout the world, the headlines were, as Le Monde printed them in Paris, "We're all Americans now." The empathy for what had happened to the United States was shared by everybody.
Now, as the lives of thousands more Americans can be added to the death toll, there is open dissent. I went looking for support for the war, here amongst the memorials of America's other great battles, but instead found this.
I think it's fucked.
You're pretty
I think it was a pretty stupid move. I think it was an overreaction. I think it met the needs of a fairly weak administration.
Unnecessary.
Unnecessary.
Do you think that you've been told the truth?
No. Definitely not.
America's history is told through its wars. It etches the truth into its walls, even when the truth is a bitter pill. The barricades may have come up over America's public monuments, but from inside its most secretive organizations, they're coming down, and there is a determination by some that the truth about Iraq will be told.
Well, there is the biblical promise that the truth will set you free, and I think applied in this case, in order to start repairing the serious damage to the credibility of the United States government and the U.S. intelligence community, one has to get to the root of why the public was misinformed about a key issue leading to a war that's been very costly for the United States.
Truth was not the first casualty of war. Truth was a casualty of the debate in the run-up to war. And I think that's important. Now, I'm of the view that the fact that governments may have lied in the past doesn't make it acceptable for them to lie either in the present or in the future.
I do think there is a truth. For example, there was a truth that Iraq did not and was not supporting al-Qaeda and was not involved in 9/11. That's a fact. The president ought to say that already. There was a truth and a fact that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. Those guys still haven't said that yet. The president and Cheney still haven't said that yet. That's a truth. They ought to come out and say that.
One of those to come out is the former head of the State Department's intelligence unit, Greg Thielman, who says he cannot sit silently and let the intelligence community take the rap over lies told by the government.
I do it because it seems like the only honorable thing to do, and I do it out of a sense of the importance of the public knowing the truth as soon as they can. And I don't mean that I hold all the truth, but I know some things which the public needs to know.
The war in Iraq was a product of the White House and its elite core of presidential advisors, the hawkish neocons, determined to reshape a post-9/11 world in their own image. The former Director General of the Central Intelligence Agency, James Woolsey, is an influential figure in conservative power in Washington and a close confidant of Condoleezza Rice. He's also an executive at this company, a major beneficiary of outsourced intelligence and security contracts. At Booz Allen Hamilton, business is booming, and the world is their chessboard.
We have to deal with, I think, the whole Muslim world, particularly the Arab world, but the Muslim world in general as well. The way we dealt with Eastern Europe during the Cold War. We won the Cold War along with Australia and Britain and the others who fought it. We were convinced that we were on the same side and that this was a war of freedom against tyranny, not a war of East against West or anything else. We have to do the same thing with the world's Muslims. I think it probably won't take the 75 years and the hundreds of millions of deaths that World Wars I, II, and the Cold War took in Europe. I think the Arabs, in other words, are likely not to be as big a problem as the Europeans were for freedom.
Hikers rally to raise a few $1,000s for the families of 9/11 victims. In their name, the Bush administration has spent $150 billion waging war in Iraq. James Woolsey says that's not enough.
In the Kennedy administration, before Vietnam, the United States was spending 9% of its gross domestic product on defense. That would be the equivalent of between $900 billion and $1 trillion for the defense budget in today's terms, which is about double what we are in fact spending.
And you would advocate getting up to those levels?
I certainly would advocate both for foreign assistance and for military and intelligence spending more than we are now, yes.
Americans live in the most energy-consuming nation on Earth. Most of their energy comes from oil. The Bush administration says oil had nothing to do with the invasion of Iraq. It was the war on terror, stupid. But if that's the case, they got the wrong man.
It wasn't the Iraqis who attacked the United States. The Iraqi government had no collaborative operational relationship with al-Qaeda. It was very unfortunate that the administration here succeeded in linking the two events, describing it as, in President Bush's words, as different faces of the same evil, describing Iraq as an ally of al-Qaeda, which is simply not true.
But truth is not what it was about. The Bush administration was prepared to go to any lengths to build a case for war against Iraq, including going to Niger in West Africa. Documents, now known to be forgeries, had turned up claiming Saddam Hussein was buying uranium from Niger. Former US Ambassador Joe Wilson, who'd served under 3 American presidents in West Africa and Iraq, was brought onto the case to investigate.
In early 2002, I was contacted by the CIA and asked to come out and talk about Niger uranium. I was told that the Vice President's office was interested in a report that purported to be a memorandum of sale agreement covering several hundred tons of uranium yellow cake between Niger and Iraq. I was briefed on the report and was willing to go out and take a closer look at this, even though my own understanding of both the Niger government and the uranium industry in Niger made the notion that such a transaction could take place suspect. Mine was only one of 3 reports from the field. There was also a report from our ambassador on the ground who had spoken to the current government about whether or not such a thing could happen, and she had come away, as she told me, believing there was nothing to the story. And there was a 4-star general, Marine Corps general, based in Germany, which has responsibility for military relations with Africa, who had also come down, and he'd also asked the question of the current government and had gone away satisfied with their response. So there were 3 reports.
And they were not contradictory?
And they were not contradictory, no.
3 reports, all denying Iraq was importing uranium, but this is what happened.
Then Ambassador Wilson's report came through, and even though it was disguised by the CIA without telling the U.S. intelligence community who this was, he was identified without name as a source who had no established reporting record. But nonetheless, it was another piece of information that should have raised warning flags on this report. And it apparently was effective because the CIA later on, months later, called up the White House and said, don't use this report in a speech, because we have serious doubts about it. And then when a few months later again, the president included in his State of the Union message, the White House claimed that they had forgotten that they had received a call personally from the Director of Central Intelligence about the report. Something's very fishy about this account.
January 28, 2003. President Bush delivers his State of the Union address designed to inch the world closer to war with Iraq. In that speech, despite all intelligence advice to the contrary, President Bush lied to the American people when he uttered these words.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
The Senate itself was notified almost 4 months before the State of the Union address that the British intelligence wasn't good. The White House was notified 4 days later and told the president should not be a witness of fact on this. And yet the person who's vilified in all this is the person, not the person who put the 16 words in the President's State of the Union address, but the person who brought it to the attention of the American people that, in fact, those 16 words should never have been there, and the U.S. government well before the State of the Union address.
Britain had already gone public about the highly suspect uranium story. Prime Minister Tony Blair ignoring the advice of senior analysts when he delivered this address to the House of Commons.
Saddam has bought or attempted to buy, covertly, to acquire 60,000 or more specialized aluminium tubes, which are subject to strict controls due to their potential use in the construction of gas centrifuges.
These tubes did not seem to be suited for the uranium enrichment process. They were not the right size. They were a type of high-strength aluminum that did not seem to be that which the Iraqis would be seeking. For example, it was anodized. It had a coating on it. This is not something you would want to do in uranium enrichment process.
In addition, we know Saddam has been trying to buy significant quantities of uranium from Africa, though we do not know whether he has been successful.
Intelligence analyst Dr. Stephen Pullinger, an advisor on armed conflict to the British Parliament.
Intelligence, which hadn't significantly changed, had to be heated up, had to be repackaged, recooked in a sense, and presented to the British people as though there was new evidence that the threat was stronger than the intelligence service were actually saying that it was. And he had to give the impression that there was an imminence about the Iraqi threat. But at the same time, the intelligence was being used to generate headlines such as 45 minutes from attack. And in terms of the wider public perception, the British people were feeling that Saddam Hussein was intent on using his weapons of mass destruction within a very short time frame and potentially against British targets on Cyprus.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons, that Saddam has continued to produce them, that he has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes, including against his own Shia population, and that he is actively trying to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
Was Tony Blair being dishonest?
No, I don't believe he was being dishonest. He was, as all good lawyers do, he had the case that he wanted to present, and he presented it in the best possible light. And he used language in a way that suggested, to the greatest possible extent, there was an immediacy about the importance of taking action now, without actually overstepping the line and saying and claiming anything that he knew to be untrue.
So was he being honest and straight with the British public? Based on what you know now and what you feel, do you think the Prime Minister was being honest and straight with the British public? In Australia, on February 4, 2003, Prime Minister John Howard delivered the same false information to the Parliament using almost identical language.
Iraq continues to work on developing nuclear weapons. Uranium has been sought from Africa, but has no civil nuclear application in Iraq.
In regard to the claim that Iraq was trying to purchase uranium in Africa in 2002, now the Office of National Assessments, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Department of Defence all knew by early 2003 that that claim was unfounded, that Iraq hadn't been trying to purchase uranium in Africa. But yet, after they all knew that, the Prime Minister still used that piece of information in an address to the Australian Parliament.
Bush, Blair and Howard were all singing from the same hymn book. But millions of protesters took to the streets, still unconvinced that war in Iraq was justified. Did the people know something their governments did not? February 5, 2003, and the pro-war lobby's tour de force was unleashed when one of the Bush administration's most respected servants, Secretary of State Colin Powell, delivered what was hailed as the deal-breaker for the pro-war case, when Powell methodically presented a case for war against Iraq.
And in the little that Saddam Hussein told us about UAVs, he has not told the truth. One of these lies is graphically and indisputably demonstrated by intelligence we collected.
You can read the actual words that the analyst that had worked for me put on paper and gave to Secretary Powell days before he presented his speech to the United Nations.
What were those words?
Well, they were words like, you shouldn't call things facts that are not facts. You shouldn't imply that because we have multiple sources, that therefore means that the information is reliable. I mean, this is really extraordinary examples, it seems to me, of speaking truth to power. I mean, our office had a great deal of respect for Colin Powell. We knew that he was under pressure from the White House for being insufficiently enthusiastic about going to war with Iraq. And we knew that at the time of this speech in February of 2003, that the nature of this exercise was to present an advocacy argument to the world community. It was not an academic, scholarly search for truth on the subject.
But it was presented in that way.
Well, that's exactly right.
My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. This is one of about 65 such facilities in Iraq. We know that this one has housed chemical munitions.
I think that he knew he was making an argument that probably wasn't entirely true, but that the president had made a decision to go to war. He had to do what he could to get as much support for that war effort as possible. Powell had already been told, we are going to war, period. So at that point, it's a question of getting as many allies as possible.
Powell's Security Council address was to be a defining moment in the resolve of the Bush administration. Michael Ratner, described as America's most important civil libertarian.
Well, I think it was stunning because it was an effective speech in the community, even the liberal community. I got calls the same within the hour from liberal friends saying, I don't think we can oppose this war anymore.
Communities around the world, the sheer audacity of Colin Powell's address to the UN Security Council and that of Bush, Blair and Howard left them speechless. They knew there were errors of facts, but most remained mute to it. Government policy to invade Iraq was a done deal. In London, the WMD specialist Dr. David Kelly made the mistake of expressing his concern about exaggerated Iraqi capabilities to a BBC journalist. And in Canberra, at the top intelligence agency, the Office of National Assessment, a senior intelligence analyst, Andrew Wilkie, was feeling increasingly restless about the case for war.
The term jaw-dropping is a good term, and I think it describes well the reaction of some people to Colin Powell's 5 February presentation to the Security Council in particular. Some things he said were completely unfamiliar to Australian intelligence agencies, in particular the detail of Al-Qaeda's activities in Iraq. At the time, we thought there was no hard intelligence to back up Colin Powell's claims.
The truck you also see is a signature item. It's a decontamination vehicle in case something goes wrong.
In fact, the day after Colin Powell's presentation to the Security Council, there was a lot of effort in the Office of National Assessments to re-trawl through the database to see if we'd missed something. And by the end of that exercise, we were sure that there just wasn't hard intelligence to back up most of what he'd said, and there was no hard intelligence to back up the fundamental claim that there was active cooperation between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. That radio conversation in particular, with the benefit of hindsight, was just two Iraqis double-checking that they had conformed with the Security Council requirement to locate and to hand over any banned weapons. I mean, they were just double-checking. That's all they were doing. They were double-checking.
The special security facility and the decontamination vehicle will be in the area. If not at any one of them or one of the other, it is moving around those four, and it moves as it needed to move as people are working in the different bunkers.
I can remember being in O&A and laughing with some former colleagues about them looking like fire trucks. It was that obvious. But yet, Colin Powell in the Security Council saying they were decontamination vehicles, most people would have believed him. Most people thought they could have believed him. Most people should have been able to believe him. But for those more familiar with the material, so much of it was just complete nonsense.
With this track record, Iraqi denials of supporting terrorism take their place alongside the other Iraqi denials of weapons of mass destruction. It is all a web of lies.
So it really makes Secretary Powell look more culpable in this what I would almost call a defrauding of the American people on what the nature of the Iraqi threat was.
Just days before missiles were launched over Iraq, it became clear to intelligence specialists the truth would not get in the way of this war. Did you see any intelligence come across your desk that caused you to form a view that Iraq posed an imminent threat to the United States?
I think I can answer that fairly quickly, and the answer is no. And indeed, there was no hard evidence that Iraq would pose a security threat even to the major population centers of its neighbors or of Israel, let alone of the United States. And none of our reporting to the senior leadership of the State Department ever implied that there was an imminent security threat to the U.S. from any of this information.
And he will almost certainly, at some time in the future, use these weapons to fulfil his never-abandoned ambition to dominate his region.
John Howard in particular seeks to mislead the Australian people when he says that he was not aware of the concerns and the uncertainties. The intelligence material was always carefully worded and was always very, very carefully qualified and caveated.
So I know, for example, from personal experience that the Australians would have had a pretty good idea of the overall State Department assessment of how we assessed the threat posed by Iraq, what we thought of the evidence on Iraq's nuclear weapons program, for example. That is the kind of thing that, indeed, I think Australia was at least as aware of as some other parts of the U.S. government.
As the inevitability of the invasion of Iraq grew ever closer, Andrew Wilkie, former Lieutenant Colonel, former aide-de-camp to the Governor-General, senior intelligence analyst, decided he had to blow the whistle on the intelligence fraud, and he would blow it as loudly as one man could.
I grappled with this for weeks and weeks and weeks. In fact, it was Friday morning, the 7th of March, a little before my resignation on the 11th of March, where I made my final decision. And I wrote a little note to the high-profile Australian journalist Laurie Oakes and put it in my diary and went down to my car and drove over and put it in his letterbox. In some ways there was a great feeling of relief when I did that, because I'd made a decision and I'd started something that I probably couldn't stop once I'd put that note in the box. I felt that, well, there were great risks in me doing that, worried that my actions might be discovered and that I might be stopped before I could go public. Concerns that the Commonwealth might get, the government might get a whiff of what was going on. As announcing my resignation to the Director General got closer, I must say, it became quite upsetting. 4:30.
How did you prepare yourself?
Well, there were practical considerations. It sounds a bit mundane in retrospect, but I had to clear my emails and clear my trays and tidy up my safe, and I returned secret documents I had in my safe that needed to be returned to different people. I remember putting my collection of passports in one little spot in my safe where people could easily find them, so they wouldn't be worried about where such important documentation was. I basically got all my affairs in the office in order to do the right thing by my colleagues. I also had to make sure that all my personal affairs were in order, paid all my bills, because I wasn't sure if I may have gone into detention, to be jailed for what I did. I just didn't know what the future would hold. My last commitment in ONA on the day I resigned was in fact to go to a planning conference at 4:30 that afternoon, which I suppose is again at odds with the government's claim that I wasn't involved in the Iraq issue. I was actually, the day I resigned, I was at a planning conference at 4:30, sitting only a couple down from the Director General. And when he left the meeting to go to his office about 5 o'clock, I followed him only a few minutes later, and for what was, I think, the most upsetting moment of the whole exercise, telling him that I'd gone to the media and that it would be on the news shortly, and it would be in the bulletin the next morning.
What did you say?
Not much more than Kim, I need to talk to you, and I suggest you sit down. But then simply something like, Kim, I'm not sure how to tell you this, or it's not easy to tell you this, but I've gone to the media to voice my opposition to the Iraq war, and I slid across the table my resignation that I'd already prepared. And he didn't say much himself. He was obviously just astounded at what I'd done. And he said something like, do you know the damage this will do? Which was a curious thing to say, I suppose. Any damage I might have done to ONA or to the Australian government was irrelevant compared to the damage that was about to be done to Iraq. But he said over and over, do you know the damage this will do? And I said something like, well, there's nothing much more I can say, and I'll be off. And I went to leave the office as he went towards his desk, because by this stage it was well after 5, and the news was going to be on at 6 interstate. So he had less than an hour to notify the Prime Minister's office, and I knew he would have to do that. He was picking up the phone as I was leaving the room, on the edge of tears. I mean, what I did was just so alien to him. I mean, he was the perfect public servant, and I'd done the unimaginable.
A senior intelligence officer resigns over our commitment to the war. In what's certain to be an embarrassment to the Prime Minister, the officer has told our political editor, Laurie Oakes, that Australia's policy is, quote, dumb and not worth the risk.
He's just thrown away his career because of something he feels about very deeply. I don't think the government is likely to take action against him because he's been very honourable, very careful to reveal no information against the national interest, no intelligence information at all.
Days after Wilkie's resignation, the dogs of war were unleashed. It was America's first ever pre-emptive strike against a sovereign nation. The living room war of Vietnam where we watched the battle on our TV screens, had morphed into the internet war. Both sides in the conflict posting their victories on websites. It was war as a video game. By early May, on the USS Abraham Lincoln, President Bush, in full pilot's kit, prematurely declared game over.
My fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
In the months following, the search for weapons of mass destruction yielded nothing. The US pro-war lobby quickly found a new reason for going to war.
Freedom for the Iraqi people and deposing one of the world's worst dictators was a perfectly fine reason for going to war with Saddam Hussein.
But Iraqis have endured brutality for 3 decades. I've seen video of them having their tongues cut out, their genitals cut off before their beheading. To a much betrayed Iraqi people, there was no need to lie about weapons of mass destruction. Deposing Saddam had been a perfectly fine reason for going to war for 30 years. In the ever-expanding world of Islam, in the mosques and marketplaces of the Middle East, the anti-Western feeling is palpable and growing by the day. In the women's prayer room at the King Abdullah Mosque, there was a cold hostility towards me and my camera, until I established I was not American, British or Israeli. For the first time in my life, though, I felt concerned about telling anyone I was Australian. Most of these women are very poor, either Bedouin or Palestinian. They're contemptuous of national borders and consider they're still part of a larger Arab and Muslim world.
I don't think there's a Muslim in the world anywhere who's not grieving.
British-born Patricia Skinner converted to Islam 30 years ago. She's lived in Iraq and Jordan all of that time, raising her 5 children as devout Muslims, wearing the veil for the past 15 years, but all the while assuming there was a bridge between her 2 cultures. Today, she says, the invasion of Iraq has destroyed all trust between the Arab world and the West.
They've more or less destroyed Iraq now. There's very, very little left of Iraq now. I mean, education institutions, medical institutions, businesses, research, it's all been smashed, destroyed. And then you've got people who, they're asleep one night, a bomb comes and drops on their house. When they went to sleep at night, they might have had brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles. They wake up the next morning, they're lucky if they've got members of their entire family left. How would anybody feel in this situation? I mean, people like Zarqawi, if he's doing all the things that they say he's doing, I mean, why is it all right for other nations to go and fight with the United States against Iraq, but it's not all right for other Arabs who consider themselves the same as the Iraqis to go and help their Iraqi brothers in this fight against occupation? What's the difference?
Since the invasion of Iraq, Islamic fervour has taken on a distinct anti-Western tone. Once considered a westernized playground for the Middle East, Amman's radical Islamic majority has increased its opposition to the pro-Western king there, and there is active resistance to the so-called democratization of Iraq. If America, Britain and Australia think they're winning the hearts and minds of the Arab world by invading and occupying Iraq, I saw no evidence of it. No one wants to characterize this conflict as the great clash of civilizations, and yet many Arabs I spoke to consider the lines have been drawn with Iraq for precisely that scale of battle. Muslims have called it a jihad. President Bush called it a crusade. Freedom versus tyranny, good versus evil. It doesn't take long before such simplistic calls to arms are translated as Muslim versus Christian, the West versus the Middle East. And given the violent clashes this land has seen over the millennia, it's not surprising the battle for Iraq is seen in the Arab world as an historic battle for survival.
What is your view?
Hamza Mansour is the president of the Islamic National Front, part of the Brotherhood of Islam, an organization providing financial, logistical and political support for the Iraqi insurgents and dedicated to the overthrow of all conservative pro-Western Arab governments.
والمقاومة لا تمل من الصبر. لقد صبرت جنوب إفريقيا وصبرت الجزائر وتحررتها. لكن كلما كانت أقصر كلما كانت عذابات الشعوب أقل. نحن لا نريد أن نرى مخطوفين ومقطوع رؤوسهم، لكن لا خيار أمام المقاومة إلا أن تقاوم. أنا أعتقد أن حرب بوش على العراق وأفغانستان ضاعفت من شعبية ابن لادن، وكل يوم يمضي على الاحتلال للعراق وأفغانستان سيزيد من أنصار وشعبية ابن لادن، والاستبداد الذي تمارسه الحكومات في الوطن العربي والإسلامي يزيد من شعبية ابن لادن.
Almost 2 years into the war on tyranny, and this has become the most enduring symbol of the conflict. This time, the brutalization carried out in our name, by our allies. And in the face of Abu Ghraib, even Saddam Hussein's cronies have found their voice again. The professor of international law at Baghdad University, Khalil El-Hadidi.
صدام حسين كان رجلا دكتاتوريا وهذا من مساوئه، لكن هذا لا يمنع أن يكون رجلا وطنيا يعرف مصالح بلده جيدا ويدافع عنها.
For my guide and interpreter, Guzine Najim, this interview was too distressing. Herself the victim of Saddam's brutality, Guzine was still in exile, and she could feel the hatred of the West was moving her further and further from her dream of returning home one day.
أقول في منتهى الصراحة أنا أحب مسألتين في العراق الآن. أولها أن يخرج الاحتلال، وثانيها أن يقتص العراقيون لكل قطرة دم أريقت على أرض العراق من قبل الأمريكان وحلفائهم.
For Guzine, his lies were too much. Where, she asked him, were you when my husband was murdered and my children imprisoned? Don't you know that under the regime of a tyrant, the people will grab hold of any savior, and they will not ask, why have you come to rescue me?
مشكلة العراق الحقيقية أنه قال للأمريكان لا، والآخرين قالوا للأمريكان نعم.
For Guzine and the millions of Iraqis, there is still no peace and no answers. No, the reasons why America, Britain, Australia and others went to war in Iraq are questions for our democracies. No matter that the overthrow of a brutal tyrant has been the outcome, that was never the declared reason for taking us into war in the first place. The lessons of Vietnam are that the truth will win out. Now more than ever, it seems the people of Iraq, America, Britain and Australia need to know the truth about why we went to war, if for no other reason than out of respect for the values of the democracies in which we live. Values like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to dissent. Values we're prepared to go to war for, they're so sacrosanct. Or are they? During the making of this film, Ambassador Joseph Wilson's wife, an undercover CIA agent, Valerie Plame, has been illegally outed by someone within the US administration who leaked her name to the press, thereby risking her life, those of her contacts, and forcing her to retire.
The larger issue at stake in this, of course, is what the signal the administration is sending to the American people. And that signal is, should a citizen exercise his right in our democracy to challenge the government on what it has said and done in the name of the American people, then we, the administration, will use every political weapon in our arsenal to destroy that citizen and his family. Be afraid, be very, very afraid.
Thank you to everyone.
Andrew Wilkie, now a member of the Greens political party, has been publicly vilified for speaking out against the war, his book censored, and classified intelligence reports he'd written were leaked to the press and a government senator in contravention of the Crimes Act. The inquiries into the leaks have produced no charges. Instead, Wilkie was accused of treachery.
I have never felt treacherous in regard to my country. I see that I betrayed my government for my country, and it doesn't worry me at all that I betrayed my government because I think the government's misconduct is so serious that it doesn't deserve my loyalty. That there's perhaps nothing more serious than a government taking a country to war for fraudulent reasons.
Officers of the Federal Attorney General's Department demanded access to my laptop and computers. My personal and professional files and emails were accessed, my computer hard drives destroyed, and I was threatened with 7 years jail for filming part of the process or even disclosing details about it. Our access to public buildings, monuments, parks, and the right of assembly has been severely curtailed in the interests of the terror watch. In Britain, Dr. David Kelly, who was vilified by the Foreign Affairs Committee, was found in a wood near his home, his wrist slit, and despite many questions about the circumstances of his death, an inquiry concluded he'd taken his own life. Michael Ratner says civil liberties in modern America have reached an all-time low.
So it's changed across the board. It's changed in the president's ability to detain people indefinitely on his word, to not give us access to courts, to what's happened to non-citizens, to what's happened particularly to people of Muslim and Arabic origin, and to what's happened to the right to dissent in this country, which has really been harmed.
Far from reducing the threat of terrorism, since the invasion of Iraq, the terror web has become a multi-headed hydra. As for the shadowy figure who started it all, well, his whereabouts have been narrowed down to within a few million square miles.
I imagine he is up there in that Pakistani-Afghan border area among some of those tribes. Another possibility is the Iranian-Afghan border. And a third and more remote possibility would be the Yemeni-Saudi border area, Waziristan or someplace near it.
And as for the architect of this illegal war, a war based not on the truth, not on intelligence, but on a web of lies.
I believe that one of the worst things the head of a democracy can do is mislead the public about an issue of war and peace that will result in the deaths of the sons and daughters of that country. And it is in that belief, and the belief that members of the administration did just that, I would be in favor of impeachment.
But he's just been re-elected.
Well, then impeachment would be in order.
On 9/11, 2001, the world stood still for a time when we were frozen by shared sorrow. For that tragedy to be followed by a war based on deception, in which too many more lives have been taken, does no honour to those who were killed, and dishonours those left behind.